The U.S. has had enough of Venezuela. Tensions have been bubbling up between the two nations for quite some time, but it appears a turning point has finally been reached, as American President Donald Trump has now dispatched a sizable military strike force to the South American nation. It's all part of the U.S. push to disrupt the flow of illegal drugs like fentanyl and cocaine into the U.S. and erase the cartels. Responsible once and for all, Trump's move also piles pressure on Venezuelan leader Nicolás Maduro. There has been bad blood between the two leaders, dating all the way back to Trump's first term. In 2020, Maduro and several of his allies were indicted in a New York federal court, charged with narco-terrorism and conspiracy to import cocaine into the U.S. to disrupt and damage the country's society and communities. The Attorney General at that time, Bill Barr, stated, "The Venezuelan regime, once led by Nicolás Maduro Moros, remains plagued by criminality and corruption. For more than 20 years, Maduro and a number of high-ranking colleagues allegedly conspired with the FARC, Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, causing tons of cocaine to enter and devastate American communities. Today's announcement is focused on rooting out the extensive corruption within the Venezuelan government, a system constructed and controlled to enrich those at the highest levels of the government. The United States will not allow these corrupt Venezuelan officials to use the U.S. banking system to move their illicit proceeds from South America nor further their criminal schemes." At the time of the indictment, the U.S. slapped a whopping $15 million reward for any information, leading to Maduro's arrest and conviction. That figure was later increased to $25 million in January 2025, which was the same amount America offered for the capture of Osama bin Laden in the wake of the September 11 terrorist attacks. On August 7, the reward doubled to a staggering $50 million, demonstrating just how serious the current administration is about bringing what it sees as one of the world's worst drug traffickers and cartel facilitators to justice. Announcing the reward increase, Attorney General Pam Bondi stated, "Under President Trump's leadership, Maduro will not escape justice, and he will be held accountable for his despicable crimes." Bondi also stated that over $700 million in assets linked to Maduro had been seized by the Justice Department, and that an astonishing 7 million tons of seized cocaine has been directly linked with the 62-year-old Venezuelan, and the U.S. is far from the only country to condemn Maduro. Numerous Latin American governments have refused to recognize him as Venezuela's true president, claiming that both his 2018 and 2024 re-elections were shams. The European Union, Canada, and other nations agree. Meanwhile, the Organization of American States, OAS, has alleged that crimes against humanity have been committed under Maduro's leadership, and the International Criminal Court, ICC, has also opened an investigation against him. Now, as well as increasing the reward for his capture, the U.S. appears ready, willing, and eager to go much further to bring Maduro down and take out the cartels, with President Trump taking the big step of ordering an intimidating flotilla of warships and other military assets to set sail for the Venezuelan coast. That flotilla is made up of 3 Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyers, plus an attack submarine and additional assets. To be more precise, the destroyers in question are the USS Gravely, which was commissioned in 2010 and named after Vice Admiral Samuel L. Gravely, Jr., the USS Jason Dunham, also commissioned in 2010 and named after a U.S. Marine Corps corporal, and the USS Sampson, commissioned in 2007 and named after Rear Admiral William T. Sampson. Arleigh Burke-class destroyers like these are essentially the backbone of the U.S. Navy and rank as some of, if not the strongest warships in the world. Nicknamed the Swiss Army knives of the sea, they're famed for their versatility, capable of carrying out a vast array of missions, including air defense, ballistic missile defense, anti-submarine warfare, surface warfare, and even strike missions on deep inland targets. Thanks to their long-range Tomahawk missiles, Arleigh Burkes are also equipped with the iconic Aegis combat system, which is one of the most advanced and powerful systems of its kind in the world. It's capable of identifying and tracking literally hundreds of targets at the same time, including aircraft, ships, missiles, and more. It also has a vast array of advanced sensors and integrated weapons, allowing for the most rapid and efficient responses, which, in turn, makes Arleigh Burke destroyers formidable opponents in any battle. Arleigh Burke destroyers are also remarkably resilient, more than capable of withstanding attacks from enemy weapons thanks to their thick steel hulls. They're equipped with electronic warfare technologies, including radar jammers to block enemy communications, plus the likes of infrared and chaff decoy launchers to distract and disrupt incoming missiles. So not only do these ships boast extensive damage-dealing capabilities, but also rank highly in terms of survivability and defense, with virtually no major weaknesses to speak of. Media outlets, including Reuters, have also reported that around 4,000 Marines and sailors are also on the way to the region, along with several P-8 spy planes. This is not a small force. It's not just a couple of low-level ships. It's a sizable, versatile, and remarkably powerful naval armada, parked right at Venezuela's gates. While Trump himself has not yet commented on the deployment, White House spokesperson Caroline Leavitt stated, "President Trump has been very clear and consistent. He's prepared to use every element of American power to stop drugs from flooding into our country and to bring those responsible to justice. The Maduro regime is not the legitimate government of Venezuela. It is a narco-terror cartel led by Maduro. It is the view of this administration that he is not a legitimate president. He is a fugitive head of this cartel who has been indicted in the United States for trafficking drugs into the country." According to anonymous U.S. officials speaking to media outlets like Reuters and CNN, the flotilla is part of an active, ongoing effort to contain the threat of drug trafficking groups, which is set to continue for several months and will involve U.S. assets operating in international waters and airspace. Here's what might happen next. With such a strong and versatile force, the U.S. has quite a few options available to it. It could simply leave its fleet in the area, not far from the coast of Venezuela, as a pressure tactic, sending a message to Maduro that the U.S. is ready to take things further. Before waiting to see how he responds, the simple presence of U.S. destroyers so close to its waters could be enough to frighten Venezuela's leadership into taking steps to stem the flow of drugs up and into the United States. It should also provide comfort and reassurance to America's allies across the region and other counter-narcotics operations. In countries like Colombia, for example, alternatively, Washington could use its assets in the area to essentially control the Caribbean waters, north of Venezuela, conducting aerial and naval patrols of the area to gather intelligence and make it significantly harder for any drug smugglers to cross the sea. Those patrols could also extend into international waters and airspace near Venezuelan territory, allowing the U.S. to monitor the country's military movements, keep a close eye on suspected smuggling routes, and restrict traffickers' movements. Or, if it wanted to opt for a more aggressive strategy, the U.S. could take things up a notch. It could carry out maritime interdiction operations, using maritime patrol aircraft, like the aforementioned P-8 planes, along with other assets like drones and surface ships, to scan for suspected smuggling ships, hunt them down, and capture the traffickers red-handed. It could even possibly set up a naval blockade or quarantine, piling even more pressure on Maduro and the cartels he supports, while full blockade of the area is unlikely, since it would amount to an act of war according to international law. The U.S. could still make it significantly more difficult and costly for traffickers to move drugs through Venezuela's ports and across its waters without initiating an open conflict with the country. An even more aggressive approach is a possibility, too, especially with so much firepower being deployed to the area. With its huge destroyers, the U.S. military has the capacity to carry out missile strikes on targets, not just in the waters around Venezuela, but also on land. It could, for example, identify smugglers' hideouts or headquarters and wipe them off the map, or even make the call to put boots on the ground, sending some of the 4,000-strong force onto Venezuelan soil. While that might sound like a step too far, the Trump administration has repeatedly suggested it would have no qualms using U.S. military force directly against Latin American cartels, including the Venezuelan Tren de Aragua cartel, which was classified as a foreign terrorist organization back in February, alongside other cartels in Mexico and El Salvador. Earlier this year, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth stated, "All options will be on the table if we're dealing with what are designated to be foreign terrorist organizations who are specifically targeting Americans on our border." More recently, in early August, reports emerged stating that President Trump has secretly signed a Pentagon directive officially ordering the use of military force against certain South American drug cartels, marking the most aggressive step so far in Trump's war against the traffickers. The order is said to provide an official basis for direct military operations both at sea and on foreign land, while U.S. military officials have been drawing up plans for how the Army could be used to target drug smugglers and take them out. There are very few precise details about how exactly the U.S. military would go about all this, and experts are already debating what the ramifications might involve. But the crux of the matter is this: the U.S. is evidently sick and tired of seeing illegal substances flow over its borders and poison its people. And it's ready to do whatever it deems necessary, even taking the most drastic of actions, to stop the traffickers in their tracks. That's why the reward for Maduro has risen. It's why Trump has put pressure on Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum to up the ante and work with the U.S. to crack down on the cartels. And it's why the U.S. Navy is moving this formidable flotilla to Venezuelan waters. Maduro, meanwhile, is seemingly attempting to save face and has ordered the mobilization of millions of militia members in response to the arrival of America's ships, stating, "This week I am going to activate a special plan to ensure coverage with more than 4.5 million militiamen from all over the national territory. Militias prepared, activated, and armed." At an event in Caracas, Maduro also said, "The empire has gone mad and has renewed its threats to Venezuela's peace and tranquility." He continued to proclaim that no empire is going to touch the sacred ground of Venezuela, before going on to state that his country is ready to defend itself. Let the world know, let the empires know. Venezuela today more than ever has what it takes. That is why we are living in peace, and we are going to continue at peace. We carry the strength of David versus Goliath, aside from the fact that David beat Goliath, which simply would not happen in this case. The comparison is a fitting one, as Venezuela's army is dramatically smaller and weaker than America's. The U.S. has by far the strongest military in the world, dwarfing almost every other country and even far exceeding its closest competitors. Like Russia and China in numerous aspects, it has the most sophisticated military technology, the best tanks and armored vehicles, the finest fighter jets, supersonic bombers, colossal aircraft carriers, cutting-edge electronic warfare systems, and hundreds of thousands of the most motivated, skilled, and highly trained soldiers, pilots, and sailors the world has ever seen. It sits atop the global firepower military strength rankings, dominating almost every category that matters. Venezuela, meanwhile, languishes in 50th position in those same rankings, just a couple of spots above countries like Ethiopia and Angola, but below the likes of Denmark, Chile, Malaysia, and Norway. It has a minuscule fraction of the firepower that America possesses. And if the U.S. chose to launch airstrikes, deploy troops, or carry out missions on Venezuela's land, in its airspace or across its waters, there's very little the country could do in retaliation. And while Maduro has spoken of millions of militia members, expert estimates have pointed to a much, much lower tally of around 343,000 members as recently as 2020. It's highly unlikely that millions more people have signed up since then, though thousands of volunteers were seen signing up in Caracas over the weekend. Many were elderly and had little to no experience, receiving only the briefest and most basic of introductory training after pledging their lives to the cause, even if Venezuela did amass a sizable militia. The U.S. has exponentially greater resources to call upon, if needed. Additionally, it would be more likely to use its world-leading warships and missile launchers to strike at its targets from the sea, rather than necessarily putting boots on the ground. Again, there's almost nothing Venezuela can do about that. Its officials continue to make bold statements, like the foreign minister, Ivan Gil, who said, "Washington's accusing Venezuela of drug trafficking reveals its lack of credibility and the failure of its policies in the region, while Washington threatens Venezuela steadily. Advances in peace and sovereignty, demonstrating that true effectiveness against crime is achieved by respecting the independence of its peoples. Every aggressive statement confirms the inability of imperialism to subdue a free and sovereign people." The Venezuelan government has also issued a temporary ban on the operation of drones anywhere in its airspace, but none of that would be enough to deter or disrupt an American attack. The only real option Maduro has is to lean on China for support, which is something he has clearly been trying to do in recent days. At a recent event, for example, while giving a speech about education, Maduro repeatedly mentioned China and its leader, Xi Jinping, taking a moment in his speech to show off his cell phone said to be a gift from Xi himself. A spokesman for the Chinese Foreign Ministry has also issued a statement in the wake of America's naval movements, saying, "China opposes any move that violates the purposes and principles of the UN Charter and a country's sovereignty and security. We oppose the use or threat of force in international relations and the interference of external forces in Venezuela's internal affairs under any pretext. We hope that the United States will do more things conducive to peace and security in Latin America and the Caribbean region, knowing his military has no hope of fending off an American attack. Maduro most likely hopes that China will come to his aid given the fact that the countries share a relatively strong and mutually beneficial relationship. China exports around $3.45 billion in products to Venezuela each year, while importing just $739 million, giving it a surplus of around $2.71 billion, which is a helpful boost for its economy. Chinese companies have also shown keen interest in Venezuela's national resources, with recent reports revealing that a private Chinese firm has just started exploiting 2 Venezuelan oil fields and is set to invest over $1 billion in a project to produce 60,000 barrels of crude oil in the country by the end of 2026. All of that Chinese investment and interest is good news for Maduro. Indeed, it's almost thanks to China that he's even still in power and that his country has not completely collapsed. As noted by Jose Antonio Hernandez Machas, a researcher in Latin American studies, the support that Venezuela has had from China, especially at the economic level, has helped prevent the deepening of this deep economic crisis. At the same time, even though China has showed economic support for Venezuela and sees the country as a useful trading partner, there's absolutely no guarantee that it would actively get involved in a conflict or deploy its military to protect the South American nation should the U.S. decide to escalate the situation. In other words, it's not because Xi Jinping gave Maduro a free phone that he'd also be willing to enter a war with the U.S. just to defend Venezuela. Indeed, many experts say that Maduro has essentially isolated himself, even from countries that could have been allies in other circumstances, with analyst Gabriel Pastor noting, "China's position is saying something that more or less everyone can expect, but it does not mean that China is going to intervene in the conflict by supporting Venezuela." So, while the Venezuelan president may appear cocky and confident in front of the cameras, he's much more likely to be a nervous wreck behind the scenes, watching the warships get closer and worrying what it might all mean for his regime, his legacy, and even his life. But while Maduro and his cronies must be worrying what the U.S. has in store for them, many of the Venezuelan people are said to be quietly overjoyed with the arrival of the American flotilla. Speaking with Fox News, Venezuelan exile Jorge Galicia stated, "I think many people in Venezuela are extremely optimistic. They cannot really be loud about it. Because they're facing a terrible criminal regime, if they express their gratitude towards the United States government and towards President Trump for what is for the pressure he's adding against Maduro, they're going to face horrible consequences. That's why don't really see a lot of expressions coming out of Venezuela. But I have people there, I talk to them, they are happy." In the same interview, Venezuelan political refugee Franklin Camargo noted that the Venezuelan people see the Trump administration and the U.S. at large as one of their main allies in the fight for freedom, adding, "When we talk about Nicolas Maduro, when we talk about the Venezuelan regime, we're not just talking about a government that we dislike or a dictatorship, a soft dictatorship. We're talking about a narco-state. It's also a regime that sent Tren de Aragua, the same criminal organization that killed, for example, Laken Riley, or that killed Jocelyn Nungare. So there is a need for the American people, for the well-being of the American people in the Western Hemisphere, to have a regime change to stop these cartels. Could a regime change be on the horizon? Will the U.S. crank things up a notch and launch an actual attack on Venezuelan soil in the days and weeks to come? Only time will tell. But one thing is clear. America is very serious about its campaign against the cartels. And the lives of drug traffickers across Venezuela are about to get a whole lot harder. You can learn more about Trump's war on drug traffickers in our recent look at the secret directive the president recently signed, allowing military maneuvers in Latin America. Or check out our breakdown of how an encounter went down between Mexican cartels and the might of the U.S. Coast Guard. Make sure to subscribe to our channel too, so you can be among the first to find out what happens next in this rapidly evolving situation.